Hey everybody, it's Eric here.
And Chris.
And you're watching Low Blow Radio. We are going to discuss a little bit about AEW Revolution last night. We're not going to get into the blow-by-blow of the card. Let's maybe discuss some of the bigger happenings and moments of the evening, because that's certainly what's been most talked about today. So let's hop on those hot-button news items. I know you were certainly caught up in the hype of the announced new signing of last night, much like everybody else was anticipating this one. And I can say everyone's personal anticipation and that kind of thing can certainly play a factor in how they were affected by the announcement. But AEW had certainly built this up as something pretty big and monumental for this pay-per-view. And yeah, I don't think the expectations lived up to it quite a bit.
It's such a dichotomy, because it's Christian, who is from Orangeville, where I lived there for a long time. It's like my Canadian hometown is Orangeville, so I love him. He was my last interview at the Orangeville Banner, was Christian. He's a really nice guy. Yeah. And I've always enjoyed watching him wrestle. Mm-hmm. I always thought he was underappreciated, undervalued in the WWE. Loved his TNA stint because it elevated him up. Yeah. But because of the hype that had gone into this and the expectation level that admittedly I'd allowed myself to get to, when Christian came on the stage last night, it was like this balloon inside. I was ready for them to give me something to absolutely explosive pop. Right. And instead, it was a slow deflation of the air being let out of a balloon at the bottom. And it was disappointing. Yeah. And then I'm feeling bad that I'm disappointed by a guy that I really like. Mm-hmm. And I think he's a fantastic signing for AEW for all the reasons that he is. He's at the right age range to be bringing up and training and putting a good rub on their young guys. Gets to work in some new matches we've never seen him have before. He is a veteran. He is a superstar. He's a two-company world champion. Yeah. Yeah, and if he's healthy and ready to work, like actually work in the ring, no better time to do it now than, in a couple of years he may not be able to, right? Like, so if he is medically cleared and that kind of stuff and ready to wrestle again, I'm all for wanting to see that side of Christian. But no, I think we discussed a little bit of this off the air as well, and it's, it just comes down to management of expectations. Management of expectations, exactly. But how much of that is on the company, and how much of that is on me as an individual or anyone as an individual? Is it a shared? Is there a share in it? Like, do AEW deserve any kind of blame from anybody or criticism even from anyone that, like myself, built it up so much that it had to be Punk or Brock? Because you've told us it's a big name, or is that, do they share any criticism on that, really? Or is that just all on I would certainly think us? That they do in a sense that, again, there's only so many times you can run that gamut of announcing a big announcement and it doesn't quite live up to the expectations or whichever. How many times can you roll that same kind of thing out? And they've been good in the sense that the other big surprises they've dealt with in other ways and sort of, again, managed the expectations so that when the moment happened, it felt either on point or bigger than what it initially was. So by going a different direction with this one, again, I have to fault them a little bit in the sense that they had to know the expectations they were putting out there in the world, but also when the reveal happens, it's not like they sold you a bill of goods in the sense that Christian is a Hall of Famer or the potential of being a Hall of Fame worthy person. He is, a big shift in the wrestling world, someone that the WWE was just recently using in their Royal Rumble. His longest running tag team partner, Edge, is getting another push right now. Like, he is a talked about name. It's a big deal for them to bring him over. Yeah. It fits all those sort of accolades that they were putting on this big announcement. It just sort of, when you leave it up to the vagueness of big announcement, you can't help but speculate on the highest ends of things, because they allowed the speculation to get that high. With some of the other announcements, you were able to, again, limit your expectations to be like, well, they said it's somebody, but it's only going to be a certain level of somebody. That's the thing, is it's allow versus encourage. I wonder, did they just allow me to get myself hyped up that it was going to be someone at the level of a Punk or Brock? Right. Or did they actually encourage me to get there? In which case I feel like they deserve more criticism. But I almost feel like I'm not in a position to judge it, because I was so sure it had to be big. I take it on the side of that because they know, they're marks too, they know when they say it's going to be we've got a big new signing,
future Hall of Fame. They know that a majority of people hearing that are going to start taking it to that top level.
Yeah.
So, like for myself personally, if Christian had unannounced, if Paul White had not made a tease last week, and at that spot, exact same moment in the pay-per-view last night, lights go out, the countdown thing comes up, Cage's TNA redo music starts, and he comes out and just with a clipboard does something and leaves in the ring, and they zoom in tight, and it's a contract he signed.
Yeah. I
would have popped huge. But because I had any expectation on it and the build that had come and the hype with it.
Right.
Yeah. And I know so much of that is on me and my fault. I'm not really looking for validation. I'm like, no, buddy, don't worry about it. It's not just your fault or not.
No, I guess
I want to hear a little of it.
I see it from both ends. I think you're totally justified in being as worked up in the things that they said. But I also think that AEW, they put enough fail-safes in there to at least when the backlash was inevitably going to come, because when you say stuff like Hall of Fame worthy and all those kind of things, you're certainly opening up yourself to the bigger and lavisher names. But then they're able to taper some expectations by Paul saying like, but it's not who you think it is. So at least like he's telling you straight up in the first promo, like,
it's not
we've
Punk.
Built this up to Punk. It's not Punk.
It's
like,
not Punk.
Stop thinking it's Punk. If you think it's Punk, that's on you. We told you it's not going to be Punk, basically. And
he told us it wasn't going to be him. Now, granted, he's not going to say anything different. When it is him, he's going to still say it's not him. But.
For sure, but I think, as much as people were still being worked by it, because it's wrestling, and they don't always want to tell you everything up front, they did enough to be like, if you want to get as worked up about this, feel free to. But if it doesn't live up to those expectations, yes, some of that is on us, but can be on fan interpretation too. Because I enjoyed it, but again, for a sense that it doesn't seem like it's as talked about, because to me it was just like, this really feels like a time that WWE could have been using Christian. Edge is getting a huge big push right now. People were very interested in seeing him post the Randy Orton angle, getting back into the ring with that stuff, other WWE incorporated things, and he literally called another company and went somewhere else. Like, that's the story we're being told now. And I feel like that's huge, and now is being a little bit, not as talked about because the expectations were so big due to the announcement. And I'm going to say I see it from both ends. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but that's why we were able to discuss it, I think.
Yeah, and we talked about earlier off air, like the spade to a spade analogy, because it's easy. Surprise to a surprise to a surprise. You're always going to have a hard time making comparisons. This, as for AEW specifically, the only time they've gone this exact same route was with Miro and his bringing in, where it was hyped as it's a new star under contract for the best man.
Yeah.
But because of Kip Sabian's level, it's going to be his best man. Expectations were reasonably tapered that when it was Miro, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? If Miro had come out last night, for example, that whole best man thing has never happened.
Right.
And Miro was the guy last night that comes out. I can't say I wouldn't have been as disappointed as I was to see Christian.
Right.
As much as I liked Miro's debut when it happened. You know what I mean? That's the best way I can kind of say it to how I feel like, again, and it's only on me. I'm not blaming anybody else for it, but it was a letdown, and I hate myself for that. But it was.
No, I think you're totally right in feeling that amount of letdown, just because the expectations they were able to establish. But I also can see it from AEW's side that they want to make sure Christian feels big and important and as special as he actually is for them. So it's such a hard one to call, because you really want it to be something bigger. And not that I wanted it to be something bigger. I'm happy with Christian, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do here in AEW. But I also. It's more just the fact that it's not just an overwhelming, the fans are all just happy about it because they had this other part of it, right?
And for like 2 hours of last night's show, while I'm bubbling and I've got building of all this excitement in me, I'm seeing marquees of Kenny Omega versus Brock Lesnar. I'm CM Punk taking on Jon Moxley for the time. I've got all these different things playing out that, and then they're not going to happen. So sad.
Unfortunately, not yet. But I'm going to say it's expectations and the hype and the getting worked up is one of my favorite parts of wrestling. But unfortunately, the counteractive side of that is that when it doesn't necessarily live up to that hype, you can be left in this sort of lull of, a bit of a letdown kind of thing, where it's not necessarily that they did anything bad, but that your expectations weren't necessarily lived up to.
Speaking of not living up to the hype, let's talk about the explosion at the end of the show.
Oh, wow. What an explosion. I mean, this
This honestly hurts so much because I loved this match. I know it's not it's not for everybody. The Exploding Death Match was something fairly polarizing when they had announced it, and you knew it was going to be this way. But I had just hoped that at least they were going to put the best foot forward, presentation-wise, to get people engaged in it. And I thought the match, for what it was, did that. The explosions helped the crowd be engaged. Every time one went off, they went ballistic, and they were really getting into this match. John Moxley was fighting like it was his last match on Earth. Kenny Omega was in it to win it, and he was just an absolute killer, and they were going for broke with all kinds of fun craziness that this match had really, really built and escalated to this big final emotional moment with Eddie Kingston coming out to protect John Moxley as the ring was getting ready to explode. The narrative, the story is so emotional that you're getting engaged and so strung along with them that unfortunately in the very end, when all it is snakes and sparklers, it's just kind of very much a letdown, where it's like it does take a lot of the wind out of the sails of the whole pay-per-view, because it's your final big moment of your final big investment angle. Like this, we've been invested in Kenny and John since December, when Kenny got the belt off him, from Kenny changing in the tournament. There's been a lot of build to these matchups, and this had a ton of stakes in it in that sense. So it's just, you saw
Bully Ray's tweet from this morning or late last night?
I didn't see that one specifically.
All they remember is the finish. It's a quote from Vincent Kennedy McMahon, and that's all he tweeted. And sadly, it's so true. You look on social media today and on the internet today, and that pay-per-view is just being ripped to shreds quite unfairly, because it was really only those last... Now, for me, it was the last 6 minutes killed the show.
Yeah.
The last images were the nail in the coffin of it. Mm-hmm. But I was disappointed from the moment commentary started to say, we have no fail-safes. The ring's going to blow anyway, even though the match is over. And... that makes very little sense.
No, it was odd they didn't have
storytelling or a wrestling standpoint. That doesn't add up, and then
especially when they have the characters involved that they could have been telling a more cohesive story. Don Callis is added to the commentary booth. If his understanding of what's going on with the explosions and the death match aspects of this match were he just wasn't fulfilling that part of what I thought his job on the commentary was supposed to be in this. He was just there putting Kenny over, which is fine, but he should have been talking more about the clock and understanding more of the mechanics of as to what him and Kenny had put in place here, and then sort of some big moment in the end that yes, we'll try and trap Moxley in this explosion or whatever. So no, a lot sort of things that you would have thought would have been thought out because they're so plain and simplistic that ended up not being thought out and end up being a much bigger repercussions due to the end result.
This is, it is something. It's been a criticism leveled on the product from early days of the planning stages of the production and the experience levels of the guys involved and the amount of TV exposure they've had. Would someone that, like a Dolph Ziggler, someone who's had years more experience on television over an Eddie Kingston, would they have been able to ad-lib better? Would they have done something different on the fly, realizing, oh man, I'm selling something here like I'm dead, and Shawn Michaels stands in the ring posing with more pyro than this.
It wasn't even on the
sell it.
The guys can sell it. I was fine with that. Everything building up to that moment, it was they should have just had a backup plan. If this visually doesn't look the way we want, the backup plan should be Kenny did it as a joke, like that he's trying to pull something up on John Moxley, and the commentators should have had that as the backup in their liners. Okay, this is what we're going for story-wise, but visually, if Khan doesn't see what he wants to see in the back, go with this story instead. Like they should always have a fail-safe, but it was pretty blatant and obvious that they didn't. They wanted to just, and again, I'm glad maybe in the moment they weren't trying to be all stumbled like, that didn't really look that great. They were just selling it like it is. They wanted to keep the things going. Good on Excalibur to at least try to keep that you emotionally invested, as much as the visuals just didn't help that part of it. So yeah, it's unfortunate they didn't have something else planned to get you out of this. You always find that in WWE. You find out times afterwards, like, well, that wasn't how they planned it, but they were able to on the fly come up with something that worked. The Rumbles where people have fallen out at the same time, or yada yada yada. They're always, there's always some kind of a fail safe to get you back on track. And in something like this, with such a huge, big happening moment, you would think that, just in case this doesn't work, let's have something in mind. I mean, yeah, and the first time having a much bigger crowd back and having them booing at the end, it was just
right? I know.
everything you don't want to have happen for your first big pay-per-view of the year.
Total disaster at the finish with the largest, hyped as the biggest pandemic era crowd that any show has been put on in front of, and to have that finish. And I don't know if you've heard the camera recordings that people have posted on Twitter of their own.
Right.
Because there was I could hear booing on the pay-per-view last night. It's nothing like the sounds on a live phone. They obviously did manage to dial that down a bit last night, but
yeah, I'm gonna say I think they'll do fine in the the fallout of this crappy explosion. They'll be able to write this in some way. They'll shift it. Obviously, even in the post things, they were kind of playing it off that it was Kenny Omega constructed this thing. Obviously, it went off into a dud that mistakes can happen and that kind of stuff. So by no means do I think this is like a nail in the coffin end of AEW by any means. God, it's just it's very deflating for something that I'm super invested in, something that you get so passionate about, and that they haven't disappointed me the way WWE has, so it hurts the first time when you're just sort of like, oh man, I thought they would have had a little bit more planned, but a lot of it did seem like again, not necessarily poor planning, just tapering expectations, much like we were discussing earlier on. They maybe should have tapered the expectations of what this could have been. They wanted it to be this huge, big, emotional moment, and it almost was, but not quite. So a lot of that is hindsight, and a lot of that is taking it after the moment. But
it is such a shame to hear people saying that it takes away from what was a really good match between Moxley and Omega.
Yeah,
the really good cinematic match between Darby Sting and Team Taz.
The ladder
match.
The
way they treat the tag teams like gold in AEW. The tag team Casino Battle Royale is an example of that.
It was
just fantastic.
Felt very important. The fact that it wasn't pre-show.
The money match with Hangman and Adam Page and Matt Hardy was really good and really well done.
Yeah, I don't want this dud of an explosion to detract from the really enjoyment that I got from the pay-per-view, but I do understand it too, because it's obviously going to be the more talked about thing, and that's like anything. People are more likely going to latch on to the bad stuff than the good stuff, right? So you take the good, you take the bad, take them both, and then there you have wrestling.
The facts of life.
the facts of wrestling. But I think that about wraps things up here, and we'll be back to talk about more of a blow-by-blow of the whole show when we do Low Blow Radio this week. Sound good, Chris?
Sounds good.
All right.
Adios, amigos.